Whether Star Wars Theory realizes it or not, he's actually misquoting George Lucas and painting a picture of Star Wars that Lucas wouldn't agree with.
I find your lack of chill disturbing.
Now, real quick, I just want to say that my problem here is not with Star Wars Theory. He seems like a really nice guy. He clearly loves Star Wars and loves Star Wars fans, and he obviously loves George Lucas. And I support his goal of elevating and sharing Lucas's vision for Star Wars with others. If we want to have a productive conversation about an artistic work, we need to know what the artist was trying to accomplish. And a few months ago, Theory set out to do this very thing, and he started putting out these George Lucas Answers videos, where he picks a topic or theme from the first 6 Star Wars films and explores what Lucas has to say about that topic in the making of books and other behind-the-scenes material. And the first video I want to look at is this one. George Lucas drops who the real Phantom Menace was. In the video, Theory talks about why Lucas decided to come back and make Episode 1 and the prequels. And like the title of the series suggests, this discussion centers around several quotes from George Lucas. And Theory cites these quotes as coming from this book, The Making of the Phantom Menace by Laurent Bouzereau and Jody Duncan. But here's the problem. None of the quotes featured in this video can be found in the Making of the Phantom Menace book. And not only that, but as far as I can tell, every one of these quotes seems to be entirely made up. I have made a habit of finding and collecting quotes from Lucas because I'm insane, and I cannot find any instance of Lucas saying these things. Now, obviously, I could be wrong, and if someone can show that these quotes are real and point out where these quotes come from, I'm happy to be corrected. I want to get this right. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that Theory is willfully lying. I don't think there's any indication of that. He's made it very clear in other videos that this is what he truly believes to be the story that Lucas is trying to tell. What is obvious, however, is that the source he's relying on for this information is wildly unreliable. My hunch is that someone else is writing these videos or is providing quotes to Theory, and he's just cranking out these videos day in and day out. So this is all just slipping past him without him noticing, and he's not even aware of this problem. And the problem actually goes beyond just the quotes themselves. Many of the conclusions that Theory draws from these quotes simply don't line up with what we can actually verify Lucas has said. And in some cases, these conclusions are flat out contradicted by actual quotes from Lucas. And this is becoming a more and more common problem among Star Wars fans. We come to the table with false assumptions about what Star Wars is, and then we try to find something that Lucas said that we can use to piggyback on his authority and say, see, Lucas says it, so it must be true. And we don't even realize that we've completely misrepresented Lucas's ideas. And this is not a new phenomenon. We have been misunderstanding Lucas and Star Wars since 1977. But I want to do my part to correct this.
Now, George once said after the original trilogy that fans saw the ruins of an empire, but never the civilization that came before. They knew Darth Vader and Palpatine had destroyed the Republic, but they'd never seen what the galaxy was like before the fall.
So this first one is a little tricky. Theory doesn't actually say where he got this quote from, and it sounds like he could just be paraphrasing something he remembered Lucas saying. Point is, it's unclear whether Theory intended this to be understood as a direct quote or as a paraphrase. And this is a problem that will come up again as we get further into these videos. It's interesting, though, that in previous videos in this George Lucas Answers series, Theory cites another making of book, The Making of the Return of the Jedi by J.W. Rinsler. And in those videos, he does provide page numbers and he features screenshots of the actual text from the book. But in this video, it isn't always clear where Lucas's words stop and Theory's words start. There is no on-screen text to help us out. He doesn't say quote, unquote, and so we are left to try and decipher who is saying what. He also introduces the quote by saying, "Now George once said," which muddies the waters further. You could make an argument for paraphrase or direct quote here if you wanted to. Now, if this was intended to be more of a paraphrase, I don't have an issue with that, because it is kind of similar to things Lucas has said in the past. I'm happy to grant that. That's fine. But Theory goes on in this video to present what are clearly meant to be direct quotes from Lucas in the same vague, unsighted way that this quote is presented. So if this is also supposed to be an exact quote, then it is 100% a misquotation. There is no record anywhere of Lucas saying this.
According to The Making of the Phantom Menace, George said, "It's like watching Rome fall without knowing what Rome was."
So now we get to The Making of the Phantom Menace book. I've read this book several times, and none of these quotes are there. You can check out the book on Open Library and read it for yourself. There are a total of 50 direct quotes from Lucas, and here they all are. I've provided page numbers so those of you who have the book can check my work, and you will see that none of these quotes are featured in this video. Now, when it comes to this particular quote, ancient Rome is a subject that Lucas has talked about before, like in this excerpt from the Star Wars archives. So, at best, this is somewhat similar to things Lucas has said before, but this quote isn't in The Making of the Phantom Menace or anywhere else. This quote is just made up.
"I wanted to go back to where it all started," he says. "How did the Republic become the Empire? How did a democracy turn into a dictatorship? How did a good man become evil?"
Now, of all the quotes in this video, this one bears the most resemblance to actual quotes from Lucas. You can see a few of them here. But again, this quote cannot be found anywhere in this book, and it seems to be entirely made up.
He said, "In 1977, I had the first 3 films written. The backstory was already there. Who Anakin was, how the Jedi fell, how the Emperor came to power. But I didn't have the tools to show it yet."
This is, again, not a real quote from Lucas. Somebody invented it. The closest we get is this quote from pages 3 and 4 of the making of book. Now, here in a second, Theory will draw some inaccurate conclusions based on these misquotations of Lucas. But before we talk about that and before we move on to the next quote, I want to highlight why it's important that we quote Lucas accurately. If we are not careful to quote Lucas correctly, we will end up playing a game of Star Wars telephone, where the narrative will subtly shift and shift until finally we end up with something that is miles away from what Lucas intended. We are no longer talking about the Star Wars that Lucas created, we're talking about a Star Wars that we invented as fans. And a perfect example of this is how so many fans have misinterpreted George Lucas when he talks about the Republic being corrupt and failing. Lucas returns to this idea again and again, and it is one of the main themes of the prequels, as this video rightly claims. But what Lucas never says is that the Jedi Order is part of the problem. He is always careful to distinguish the Jedi from the corruption in the Senate. But we as fans have not been so careful, and what has happened is, over time, we have conflated the Republic's downward spiral of greed and political corruption with the fall of the Jedi. And those are not the same thing. Lucas never speaks negatively about the Jedi Order itself or about their principles. That doesn't mean he thinks they're perfect. No one in Star Wars is. Every character has flaws. But the Jedi Order, their code, and their moral foundation are not presented as fundamentally broken. Lucas calls them the most moral of anyone in the galaxy. He makes it clear that they are not complicit in the Republic's corruption. They are victims of it. Lucas doesn't say that the Jedi are corrupt. He says they are corrupted, specifically by the Clone War that they are forced to fight. And that may not seem like a big difference, but there is a difference between a building collapsing because its foundation was flawed and a solid building collapsing because it was struck by an earthquake. Even though the rubble looks the same, the cause was very different. But we as fans haven't done our homework, and when we say the Republic is corrupt, we think we're saying the same thing Lucas is saying, and we don't realize that in our minds we have actually lumped the Jedi and the Senate together into the same category. And Lucas never intended us to do that, and unfortunately that's exactly what Theory does here without realizing it.
George wanted the film to feel light, colorful, filled with wonder, because corruption doesn't begin in darkness, it begins in comfort. The Jedi have become bureaucrats. The Senate is bogged down by greed. The Republic is sick, and nobody realizes it.
So 2 problems here. The first is that the Jedi didn't just become bureaucrats one day. They always have been servants of government. And that's how it's supposed to be. Lucas doesn't have a problem with that. The idea that this is a sign of corruption on the Jedi's part is not in alignment with Lucas's vision for Star Wars. Also, bureaucrat is never a term that Lucas uses to describe the Jedi, at least not in the pejorative sense that Theory uses here. And the second problem here is the notion that no one realizes the Republic is sick. This is simply not true. The Jedi are very aware of the Republic's corruption. And this again highlights how the Jedi are not part of the problem. They purposely try to steer clear from the corruption of politics.
Oh no, I'm not brave enough for politics.
I'll leave the politics to you, Senator. I'm gonna do whatever I can to help these people.
And don't forget, she's a politician and they're not to be trusted.
At the same time, the Jedi have sworn an oath to serve the Republic. So even though they distrust the political system and are uncomfortable with it, they are still forced to engage with politicians when duty requires it. Now, this tension between the Jedi and the political leadership is explored primarily in Episodes 2 and 3 and in the Clone Wars. Episode 1 doesn't really deal with this issue, simply because it's not the focus of the story yet. But there is nothing in Episode 1 that suggests that the Jedi are cool with the Senate and how they run things, or that they are somehow unaware of the corruption in the Senate.
He says it's all very civilized on the surface, but underneath, everything's rotting.
This quote does not appear in the making of book or anywhere else.
Even the title The Phantom Menace comes from this idea. The menace isn't just Darth Sidious, it's complacency, the silent, invisible decay of moral strength that destroys republics from within.
So this is inaccurate. Lucas says that the Phantom Menace refers specifically to Darth Sidious and refers more broadly to the threat of the dark side. And nowhere does Lucas give any indication that this somehow refers to complacency or the silent, invisible decay of morality. Lucas almost always avoids this kind of flowery, poetic language when he's talking about Star Wars. Now, in the description for this video, Theory goes into more detail on this and includes another quote from Lucas. And again, George Lucas never said this. And additionally, the idea that the Jedi can't sense the growing power of the dark side because they are blind to the darkness within themselves is inaccurate. Nothing in the Star Wars films and nothing Lucas has ever said support this idea.
The tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, he says, is that he's the nicest little boy you could ever meet. But inside him is the seed of what he will become. It's not about monsters, it's about choices.
Yeah, you guessed it. This quote isn't from the making of a book or anywhere else as far as I can tell. It is simply made up. And you can tell almost immediately just by looking at the final line. It's not about monsters, it's about choices. This pattern, this phrasing, it's not A, it's B, it's not this, it's that. This comes up again and again in these quotes that are featured in the George Lucas Answers videos. But Lucas almost never talks this way, especially not when he's speaking off the cuff like he is in the interviews for these making of books. He tends to ramble. He uses long run-on sentences. He tends to move from one idea to the next in a very linear, stream of consciousness way. He doesn't speak in short, poetic, contrast-driven sound bites like this. Star Wars Theory, on the other hand, uses this phrasing pattern a lot in these videos.
He didn't come back for nostalgia. He came back to tell a story. George wasn't making another action movie. He was making a historical tragedy. And that it's not because evil people suddenly take over, it's because everybody sits by and lets it happen. Because corruption doesn't begin in darkness, it begins in comfort. The menace isn't just Darth Sidious, it's complacency. And for George, the Phantom Menace wasn't about revisiting the past, it was about understanding it. The Force doesn't fade when people turn to darkness. People fade when they stop believing in the Force.
So when the person being quoted and the person doing the quoting sound identical, that's your first red flag that these quotes are probably not genuine.
Now, George didn't make the Phantom Menace to entertain fans who wanted another A New Hope. He made it to complete the circle, to give meaning to the fall that Return of the Jedi only hinted at. When you know where it ends, you can tell where it began, he says.
You already know what I'm going to say. So it's possible that they're pulling all these quotes from somewhere that I haven't heard of, but the only source cited is the Making of the Phantom Menace book. And that's just not true. I don't know what to say. Now, Theory has made a lot of other videos that I could talk about, but I don't need to because he's usually just presenting fan theories, his own ideas and other fans' ideas, and that's completely fine. I have no issue with Star Wars Theory sharing his opinions. What I do care about is making sure that we accurately represent George Lucas's opinions. We have to be honest about what Lucas actually said. The problem with this particular video series is that when Theory isn't unknowingly using fake quotes, he's placing his own ideas in between the quotes in a way that makes it sound like they support his conclusions. And if you believe these quotes are real, it creates the impression that these ideas are Lucas's view of Star Wars, when in reality they're a YouTuber's interpretation, not Lucas's. To wrap up, I just want to say again that I'm not picking on Star Wars Theory. I don't think he's trying to deceive anybody. Like I said, I'm guessing he's not even aware of this.
He was deceived by a lie. We all were.
Maybe he has someone else writing the videos for him. I don't know. But the guy clearly puts his heart and soul into these videos, and I support and share his goal of sharing Lucas's vision with others. The problem is that Lucas's vision isn't being shared in these videos. And because Theory has such a massive audience, when misinformation slips through, even unintentionally, it ends up spreading to a lot of people very quickly. And I just want to slow that spread as much as I can. This is not Star Wars Theory's problem. This is an issue all of us fans have. We think we're talking about Lucas's Star Wars, but without realizing it, we start writing our own version instead. And I know I'm guilty of this too. So again, if there's anything I got wrong here, please let me know. I want to be corrected. I don't want to spread misinformation either. Thanks for watching.